Okay, I'll move that back. How's that? Good? Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. I haven't been to an FDP meeting before, so this is good and very exciting for me. I'm going to go over an overview of where the HERD survey is housed within NSF, which is the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. I'm going to go over an overview of the HERD survey and look at some overall trends from the past decades. I'm going to go over some recent field of R&D revisions, talk about that. That happened in the 2016 survey. And then I'm going to have a discussion of potential future survey revisions and additions. I'm going to go through those, and then we're going to have an open forum, which I welcome your questions, comments, discussion on what I've covered up to that point. And then we'll have some next steps, and that will be it. So first, an overview of NSF. This is a federal statistical agency within NSF, and it reports to the Directorate for Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences within NSF. Our mission is to provide data users with objective, high-quality statistical information on U.S. and international science, engineering, technology, and R&D. We also foster research via a small grants program that improves the measurement and understanding of the science and engineering enterprise. This is just an example of our homepage. I know it's really small for those of you in the back, but if you go to nsf.gov/statistics, you can find a variety of information on science and engineering, the science and engineering data we have available. We don't just do the HERD survey, we have many other surveys that measure science and engineering in the workforce, in academia, in the business sector, in the federal government. So we have both personnel data as well as expenditure data for not just the higher education sector, but all sectors. So this is, I just encourage you to look at this to see if you might find other data that you find useful in your jobs. So now on to the HERD survey. Just a show of hands, how many are you familiar with the HERD survey? Okay, so this is just a refresher. Maybe you'll learn something, maybe not. Okay, so it's been conducted annually since 1972. Before that, it was a periodic survey that started actually in 1953. So we've had it for a while. It's a pretty institutionalized survey out there. We did significantly redesign it in 2010 after a multi-year redesign project. It is a census of all universities and colleges with a minimum of $150,000 in R&D spending in this previous fiscal year. We have a short form for the schools that are between $150,000 and $1 million in R&D expenditures for their previous fiscal year. They get an abbreviated form, and then the standard form, or the long form, is for the schools that are over $1 million. So that's about 625, I think, that are over $1 million as of the last fiscal year. We all get pretty high response rates. I'm very fortunate to have this survey because it has a response rate of over 95% every year, so it's really easy to get the response rate we have. And I thank you all. Anybody that has anything to do with filling it out, thank you very much. We appreciate all the hard work. The survey requests expenditures for all separately accounted for R&D performed at institutions during their previous academic fiscal year. And we do institution level tables, and they're on the NCSES website. And those are the ranking tables that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So the types of data collected, the R&D expenditures are split by many different things. One is federal agency sources of funding, and that's by R&D field. We also have the non-federal sources, which are state and local government, institutions' own funding, nonprofit funding, business funding, and other sources Those would include foreign governments, foreign entities that aren't businesses or nonprofits, and gifts that are restricted for research. We also asked for spending on R&D equipment by field and by non-federal or federal source of funding. And we asked for the amount of R&D expenditures that are either passed through to subrecipients or received as a subrecipient. And that helps us get at how much is being double counted in the survey. The new questions added during the 2010 redesign were foreign sources of R&D funding, medical school R&D expenditures, clinical trial R&D expenditures, R&D expenditures by the type of funding agreement, contracts versus grants or all other agreements. We also have a question on the specific cost elements, which are salaries, software, equipment, other direct costs, and the indirect costs. And we have head counts of personnel paid from R&D accounts. So now on to an overview of some trends. This is the big trend from the beginning of the annual survey through 2016, and it shows the blue line is total R&D. This is in constant 2009 dollars, billions. So the blue line shows total R&D, the red line shows federally funded, and the green line is non-federally funded. You can see the two blips in the red line correspond with the NIH doubling and then ARA funding. And then the decrease happened after ARA was spent out and federal and sequestration happened, and things declined between 2011 and 2016. 2016 was the first year in 4 years that we saw an increase in federal funding. And that dip between 2011 and 2016 was unprecedented. As you can see in the survey's history, it had been climbing for 45 years up until that point. The non-federal line really closely mirrors the federal line, except for during those blips of the NIH doubling and ARA. And now we'll go into the non-federal sources of funds, a closer look at what are the non-federal sources of funding and how much does each contribute to that non-federal funding. This is from 2010 through 2016. The blue line is your institution's own funds. That is the most significant contributor to non-federal funding for higher education R&D. And it has also been the one that has been growing over the past 7 years. The other ones, nonprofit, business, state and local, and all other sources are very small contributors to higher education R&D. A lot of times I hear business or nonprofits are going to pick up the slack where federal government is, kind of declining, and you can see that that is not happening. It's the institutions that are actually contributing more over the years. And this is taking a closer look at your institutionally financed higher education R&D spending by the type of cost. So we ask of the institution funding how much was direct funding of research projects, how much was unrecovered indirect costs on sponsored projects, and how much was cost sharing on sponsored projects. So the blue line is the direct funding of research. That could be startup, bridge funding, departmental funds that are isolated for research purposes, salary covered by the university for research faculty, all those tuition waivers for research assistants, anything paid from an R&D account that can be considered research funding is included in that category. The yellow line is unrecovered indirect costs, and it's stayed pretty constant since 2010, as well as cost sharing. And that probably has something to do with the federal amount not really going up very much over the last 7 years. Now I'll go over the 2016 field of R&D revisions that happened. As many of you probably already know, we updated the fields in 2016 to make the survey more consistent with a taxonomy that we agreed to across all of NCSES. We have many surveys that measure things by field of R&D, but we previously had all different kinds of categories for those fields, so we didn't match up across our surveys, and that was a problem for a lot of data users. So we agreed on a consistent taxonomy that we would use across our surveys that also matched with the Department of Education's classification of instructional programs, or SIP codes. It matches mostly. It's not totally, because there are some things where we just didn't agree on the categories, but for the most part we deferred to the SIP codes when we could. But at least we match across our own NCSES programs now. The changes were that the fields are now listed in alphabetical order. Some field names were revised to better reflect the disciplines included. We added new disciplines as examples under many fields, and then some disciplines were reclassified. We also added 4 completely new fields. These are all subfields, not broad fields. We added industrial and manufacturing engineering under engineering. We added natural resources and conservation under life sciences, and that was a breakout mostly from agricultural sciences. We added material science under physical sciences, and anthropology under social sciences. We had 37% of institutions who reported expenditures in at least one of those fields in 2016. The instructions we gave at the beginning of 2016 were, if you cannot adjust your fields, we gave about 6 months advance notice, I believe, but it takes schools sometimes more time than that to get the fields coded differently. So we said, if you can't do it, just report the old way, and hopefully by 2017 the fields will be updated for everybody. The new field that had the largest amount of expenditures was natural resources and conservation. 23% of institutions reported expenditures in that field, which equaled a total of $690 million. And we have a technical notes appendix in the 2016 tables that talks about the field changes and shows the detailed crosswalk between the old and the new fields, if you want to take a deep dive into how exactly it changed. But the basic story is the broad field trends are largely unaffected, because most of these changes were to the subfields within the broad fields, and moving things out of other categories into specific subfields. So it should not affect the broad field trends. Okay, so this is what I really wanted to talk to you guys about today and have a good discussion about some of the potential future survey revisions and additions that we're thinking about. It's been 10 years since we had a comprehensive survey redesign, and we've had a lot of data users and universities that have come to us with various questions, concerns over the past few years that we wanted to address. And also we are very involved in the international community of R&D statistics, and always are trying to improve our comparability with the international R&D statistics that are produced by the other countries. My boss is on a committee where they just finished a revision of the Frascati manual, which is a manual for all R&D statistics collectors around the world that actually gives the definitions that should be used for R&D and in the various sectors. So he's very interested in making sure that we're as comparable as possible with the community that agreed on these definitions. So we conducted, as a foray into exploring this new survey update, 10-year update, you might think of it as, we conducted site visits with 4 institutions last summer to begin feasibility discussions. So one of the new content areas that we're considering is capital expenditures for R&D. We asked about this when the survey first began. We had a category about capital expenditures, and then it got dropped off the survey in the 80s when we added a facilities survey. How many of you are familiar with the facilities survey? Okay, so that's a survey we do that's a sister survey to HERD that measures science and engineering R&D square feet within the universities that are R&D performing. And it also asks about some capital expenditures, but not all. So right now HERD asks about capital expenditures for equipment, but really we're asking about equipment as paid through R&D project accounts, not all R&D equipment, which becomes confusing to a lot of institutions, rightly so. It's kind of a weird way of looking at capital expenditures partially, but not totally, because HERD was supposed to be the current fund expenditure survey, and the capital expenditures was going to be reported elsewhere. That hasn't happened, so we're considering adding the capital expenditures part onto the HERD survey so that we can collect all of it in one place. So this question would be it would be asking for all of your R&D expenditures, your capital expenditures for land, buildings, all equipment, regardless of whether it's on a current project or you bought it because of infrastructure needs, software and intellectual property. The intellectual property might surprise some of you. That doesn't fit with, buildings and brick and mortar, but it is considered a capital expenditure, so it would be added to this category.
Could you give an example of?
Yes, well, let me go through the question. This gives you an example of what's included there. So it's probably hard to read, so I'll read it out loud. Just listen closely. And I have 25 handouts at the front, so the first lucky 25 people can get a paper copy today, but I can email them out to whoever needs one as well. So the sample question would be, of your capital expenditures for R&D in FY, don't know, let's just say 2020, how much was spent for each of the following categories? Land, which would be land acquired for R&D use, including land purchased for building construction. B, buildings constructed or purchased for R&D use. If the building is constructed for mixed use, please report the estimated proportion that is for R&D. That is similar to what is done on the facility survey for measuring square footage. So we would expect the similar way of prorating a building by the R&D use. Just be the cost of the building versus the square footage. C, machinery and equipment. Major capitalized machinery and equipment acquired for use in the performance of R&D. D, capitalized software, computer software that is used in the performance of R&D for more than 1 year. It would include long-term licenses and the acquisition of computer software, as well as production costs for internally produced software. I think that would be a tricky one for a lot of you, just based on what we know about our cost elements question already, that capitalized software is something that is not collected in a lot of institutions yet. And then other intellectual property products, that would be purchased patents, long-term licenses, or other intangible assets used in R&D and which are in use for more than 1 year. And I think the tech transfer offices would be involved in figuring out those costs. So that is the sample question. Before I go on, I would say that we would also like to get the question by source of funding, federal versus non-federal probably, and also by field, broad field, not all the fields. So there would probably be a couple of breakouts within this module for capital expenditures. So you can think about that. I'm going to move on. I'm going to cover all of the new content, and then we'll go back up and I'll open it up for discussion. The next new content area is full-time equivalents working on R&D. So we've collected head counts of R&D principal investigators and all other personnel since FY 2010. We chose head counts because during our redesigned site visits a decade ago, schools indicated that it was going to be impossible to give us FTE for research. There weren't, the records weren't there. It would be very, very hard. It would be very time consuming to get to the FTE levels. 10 years has gone by, so we wanted to check again to see if that is still the case, that it's impossible or just very difficult, or if it's something that we're moving toward being able to collect. Because international comparisons of R&D personnel are made using FTE. So we have the head count. We are not internationally comparable. For HERD, we have, for our business survey, we do collect FTE for that. So we're moving toward getting FTE for the other sectors. But we don't have it for HERD yet. So we're considering asking a question that would collect FTE in addition to head counts. We would probably keep the head count question because I think if you can do the FTE, you can do the head count. I mean, and you're already doing the head count. But we would be open to discussion of taking off the head count if that was better. This would be what the question might look like. So approximately how many paid full-time equivalents, FTEs, worked on research activities? I said FY 2016. Clearly that's not a question from FY 2016. FTE research personnel are calculated as the total working paid hours spent working on research during a specific reference period, usually a calendar year, divided by the number of hours representing a full-time schedule. This question wording is taken from our new nonprofit survey, which I'm also in charge of, and is going out to 6,500 nonprofits later this spring, which is going to be measuring their R&D expenditures. Just a little aside that we also have a survey that's going out to nonprofits starting up this year with real data published hopefully by next spring, as long as we can get a response rate that's reasonable. So this would be looking at the FTE and gives you the way to calculate. So this would ask for FTEs for researchers, and that would be basically the equivalent of PIs, and then technicians and other support personnel. All right, you can think about that, and we'll move on to the other issues that are not quite as large as those two issues. And then I promise I will come back and go through the slides again so you can talk about them and ask questions. So another issue under consideration is the criteria for campus level reporting. We have had a lot of discussion with large public institutions that have many campuses, many large campuses. That our criteria that we use right now, which is every campus headed by its own president or chancellor has to report separately on the survey. There's been some pushback that criteria is doesn't fit the modern structure of universities, and especially public universities that have several big campuses that are very collaborative and share programs across the campuses and have VPs for research across the campuses. So based on these discussions, our perspective is we just want to keep things fair for all the universities. That's why we put in place this criteria back in 2010 so that we could have a consistent, enforceable level to have universities report by. And we could determine that everybody was, we were applying the same standard to everybody. So we've had some discussions with universities and also with COGR. You're familiar with COGR, right? Everyone? Okay. So we've had some discussions with them about having a group of institutions via COGR talk about other criteria that could be used that would be better, a better fit for universities today, but that would still be fair to institutions that don't have that aren't multi-campus public institutions. And so I've left it with the COGR kind of ad hoc committee to give me some feedback on what might be new criteria that could be used, and that we will evaluate whether or not we want to change the criteria. There's been a lot of discussion over the last few years about, changing the structure of the public institutions so that they don't have a president or chancellor over a campus. Just, try to get around this criteria we have on HERD, and I hate to see people demoted because of the survey. And that seems silly. So we're hoping to get something that is fair and reflects how an institution does research and ranks them fairly in comparison to other institutions. So, put your thinking caps on. If this is an issue that's important to you, we welcome your feedback on what you think might be a better criteria. We came up with the criteria we did in 2010 basically because we had nothing better to pull from. IPEDS doesn't have anything that they use consistently. It's up to the universities to choose how they want to report. Accreditation is the same way. So we had very little to go on to figure out how to really separate campuses for ranking purposes. So the president or chancellor was our best criteria at the time, but we're open to revisiting that, and maybe it's everybody under the same VP for research or something like that. But I welcome you guys' feedback, because you all are the ones that are actually living and breathing the research university experience, so you know better than we do about what the criteria should be. The next issue under consideration is the perennial issue of improving consistency of institution funding and personnel counts across institutions. The institution funds has been a category that we've struggled with for a long time, getting it consistent across universities. Prior to the redesign in 2010, I think the instructions were really confusing and we didn't have much consistency at all. And then between 2010 and 2012, we noticed that there were some large differences in how universities were interpreting direct funding of institutional of research. There was two camps. There were those that only wanted to include things that were competitively awarded within their institution, internal funding that was like basically a grant process. And then that was the only thing they were including on HERD because they wanted to match what they would do for OMB A21 uniform guidance guidelines. And then there were those that were including whatever they could that was coded as research money. And they didn't, it didn't matter whether it was competitively awarded or if it was whatever. And really, that second category is what we had in mind. We didn't need it to be competitively awarded like a sponsored program. We just needed it to be coded separately for research. So in 2012, we added the instructions on the survey and the checklist, question 1.1, which tells people and gives people clues about what could be included as institution funds. And since then, the institution funds category has risen each year as more institutions have been finding and including those types of expenditures in their institution funds. So I think the consistency has improved greatly over the last 5 years, but we still have a ways to go on getting really apples to apples on that category. And I know from just anecdotal evidence of people calling me that there are a lot of questions about how to include salaries of people that are not paid, that are research faculty, but they're not paid through the research accounts. So these are issues that we'll need to really nail down if we want to have better consistency in the coming years. And so this is another area where I welcome feedback on what you think are the problems with institution funds as it currently exists, and what instructions could make it more comparable, or what you know, do's and don'ts or includes and excludes on this category. We need feedback from you all on what you think. Personnel counts, you know, we added the question on personnel in 2010. We haven't done a lot of investigation to see what's involved. I know that there is dramatic variation across large institutions on personnel counts. So I think some of it is probably the inclusion or exclusion of students working on R&D. If I had to guess, the inclusion or exclusion of people on fellowships. So those are the things that we want to dig into a little deeper to find out what's currently being included and not included across institutions, and how can we help institutions all be reporting the same thing in that category. That'll be especially important when we are trying to get an FTE question up and running, as it's only as good as the underlying pool of people you're putting in that. Another change we're considering is a separate category to report all other sponsored activities. So this question has come up from a couple of universities that they're concerned that some of the smaller institutions might be including all sponsored activities in their R&D totals, everything going through their sponsored projects office, not just R&D activities. And so having a question that asks about all the other sponsored activities that aren't R&D would help clean up the R&D total a little bit, hopefully, by giving them a space to put those other sponsored. I think a lot of universities want to show how much they're getting from external sources. That's a point of pride for universities to show that. So having a place to put those non-R&D activities that are still grants coming in might be helpful. This would be something, you know, we wouldn't include it in our R&D total. It would be a separate category that would get reported in maybe a table or two, but it wouldn't be something that we use for our science and engineering statistics, but it would be helpful. It would be for the university community. So that would be a measure that we would put out just for the universities if we included it. And so, you know, this is where we welcome your feedback again on whether that would be worthwhile to have on the survey or not. If it's more trouble than it's worth, or if you think it's a good idea. Think it over, let me know. And then finally, the other issue we're considering is separate reporting for R&D expenditures at foreign campuses. So a lot of big universities have foreign locations now. You know, we would be considering only the owned and operated locations, not partnerships. Just the, you know, if you have a campus in Abu Dhabi that is owned and operated by you all, then the expenditures at that campus would be separately reported at a breakout on the survey, so that we could see how much is actually being performed in the U.S. versus abroad. That's a rough characterization because I know a lot of PIs are doing work abroad while they are paid through you know, their U.S. Location, but this would just get at, of the universities that have foreign locations, how much is being performed at those foreign locations, to get a start at the global impact of university R&D. Okay, so now this is your chance to talk. I will go back to whatever you want to talk about, and I can go back and forth here. So I'd like your reactions to these planned or potential changes, and they can be honest and as negative as you'd like. And also, you know, what didn't I cover here that you think is really something that HERD should be considering for this 10-year update, 10-year look into, you know, updating the survey. And then other questions or concerns, totally open forum. Yes?
A couple things. I think, are you going to put out a request for comments so we have a formal mechanism to comment back? Because there's not enough hours left in this day to go.
Sure.
So I think that's number one. One of the questions that I have, the under recovery, I think the institutional funds is one of the places where people are taking the system a lot. And they're starting to throw kitchen So if there is a direct competitive research project from the USDA, and it pays the 15%, we calculate the under recovery. But for the money flowing through the state and stuff through the land grant, there's no indirect cost in that. We're not putting the under recovery there because it's not like the state programs. So I'm curious if other people are, on all their institutional funds, are including the calculation of under recovery of indirect costs in their institutional funds.
So the instructions say you should include it only for externally funded R&D. But yeah, I have no way of knowing what's going on, but that the instructions say it should only be for the external, which would include state money, even though it's not a grant. So, yeah.
For that institution that I was at before, that paid the full overhead, it's in there.
Right.
So it's in the institutional bucket because they forced the PIs to get the count for the full overhead. So it's buried in the cost sharing dollars. It's not broken out as under recovery, it's buried in cost sharing. So their institutional funds at total are elevated because they got their cost sharing dollars on their institutional.
Right.
Or their F&A on their institutional funds.
But in response, I think that's one of the great examples of how variable this really is. And I think one of the challenges that we all have is we spend more time trying to figure out what goes in where and how to do it and providing good accurate numbers. And I see the addition of buildings and it's capitalized, and I'm like, great pause, let's put it that way. And I think there's two sort of really good reasons for this. I think many of us use this as a benchmarking and way to compare ourselves, and our senior leadership, most senior leadership at the institution sees this as the only way to look at other institutions, which is somewhat normalized against each other, somewhat, but it's still gained greatly. So I think if there's some other way to conceive of a different sort of separation of these funds in ways that get accurate reporting for sort of where is the national R&D picture going. But I don't feel that this is doing it in trying to serve two masters, which is great accurate data for surveys to help demonstrate the direction of the country, but we're also trying to use it so that our leadership believes that we're productive leaders. And it's not working well for either.
Yeah, I kind of agree to that. As Steve said, I see institutions using the institutional funds to leverage their ranking system, right? So when I look at rankings, I look at external R&D. I actually remove the entire internal funding column out, and that's what I use as a benchmark because I've seen the gamut run. I know institutions. I had a VPR come to me in my previous institution and say, well, I talked to a VPR here, and they include all their endowed chairs, and they include every grad student because everything we do here is related to research. Well, that's an extreme outlier compared to schools that are more conservative and still take the approach of, how do we actually code this to R&D?
Yeah.
The other thing that's very tricky is if you don't actually separate what institutional time to support R&D versus institutional time to support academic. So where does that line get drawn between what is scholarly activity versus research activity? And if your provost doesn't see the separation of those camps, then you end up with, $900,000 out of a college of, or a Department of English, but you don't have a single external R&D grant to justify that. So it's really unclear, and I don't know that there's really enough shape to give administrators guidance to say this is why you can't do that, even though you say that your peers are doing this.
And to follow up on that, I think the whole definition of what is R&D, NSF awards say put everything in the R&D cluster for the purposes of your audit.
Right.
But if you read the definition of R&D under the HERD survey, not everything does follow. So we have differences of opinion now of what's in the R&D cluster for our audit versus what's in the R&D cluster for the HERD survey and for our estimate rate development. And we have really big problems with coding in our systems for that purposes because it isn't. Maybe that's another place where people game, like you said, all sponsored activities, some on research. You don't for the FNA rate, could you use it for the HERD? And I think a lot of people are making some determinations there. So I don't know if clarity versus giving a mechanism to report everything and allowing everything to be included but then categorized, it's sort of more like the SNRA agreement is. Every cost goes somewhere,
Yeah.
right? If we already do this and have numbers of FTEs doing this kind of data reporting at some 3 to 4 year frequency, is that a better source? It's not an annual report for everybody, but we're doing that in a way that is reproducible, audited, and there's a difference of some of the regions, but it's a heck of a lot more consistent, I think, than a report that's trying to game for ranking purposes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Open meeting.
I wanted to talk to the new question about full-time equivalents, and just, I'm pretty sure that most of us do not look at hours for our research personnel. We look at percentages of time and level of effort. So when you describe how to count full-time equivalents, you might
I'll do percentages,
go to,
okay.
months, the way the NSF does it, or percent of effort, or provide both examples,
Okay.
so that people
That's
choose
good.
the way their institution does it.
Okay. Yes,
Or even if you could just leverage how the R reporting had to be done.
okay.
No one liked it, but at least it was
You did it?
somewhat consistent.
Even though we don't count people's hours when they're faculty, our payroll system has to have some sort of an hourly basis to it, so I don't think it's any harder to count FTE personally.
It's for exempt employees, we don't use an hourly basis.
But I'm betting your accounting system does, even if it's not something that you measure, I mean, they have to have something to calculate, they have this many, this many
No,
hours.
it's done by percentages.
And ours is percentage. But you could convert that to an estimated 40-hour week.
We would want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spent enough time trying to convince faculty not to look at effort as just hours. I think to me this is a regression. I mean, now you're saying, oh, well, let's factor into a 40-hour work week. I mean, we've spent decades convincing them not to look at things through a 40-hour lens.
And not to have our sponsors ask for that kind of breakout whenever possible.
So do you all measure FTE?
Yes,
Okay, so,
we do it by percent
Mhm.
of effort.
But I would say if you're looking at administrators, I think there's an overall trend toward people's time being more devoted to research administration. Whereas if you go back in time, somebody might have done research administration at the department level 10% of their time, and it turns out that doesn't work in our changing world. There's too much to keep up with. So I think there's been a trend toward professionalization and increased FTEs, being more dedicated to research administration generally. So you may get better results now than you would have even 5 years ago because of that trend.
yes.
Could you comment more on the headcount issue with the other personnel category? It seems to be, we were looking at our own data recently on that, and our PI to other personnel ratio is way different than comparable institutions in our state. What is the exact question that's asked to classify other personnel, and why is there so much variability there?
I forgot to bring the survey today, sorry. But it is, basically, we ask all the people paid out of these R&D expenditures that you just told us, the total R&D expenditures, who are the people being paid out of these accounts? And then it's PIs are in one category, and then everybody else is in the other category. So you start with who's getting paid out of this money, and then it's anybody that's not a PI. That's classified as a PI. I think the variation, my guess, is that it's people that are counting students paid versus some people are not counting them, and that can make a big difference in the total other personnel. It could also be students on fellowships, stipends, that kind of thing. and that aren't getting included at other universities, so.
Or if a university is or is not expanding their internal expenditure definition, potentially?
Yeah, I mean, that would go along with adding every student on any kind of, you know, tuition waiver, stipend, whatever, including them in the total. Which is technically allowed as long as it's for R&D work, you know. As long as these payments are going for work on R&D activities, it's okay to include. But I know a lot of institutions haven't been able to include it, so. Yes.
On the changes in discipline that you recently did, do you expect that to be something that happens regularly? Okay.
No.
I was just going to say, because a lot of universities are starting to really measure based on research expenditures, and so like us, we've got those kind of coded in our system where we can, so a change means. more
Right,
than
right,
change.
right. Sorry, I should have mentioned we haven't changed them, you know. We didn't change them for about 40 years before we changed. I anticipate a similar length of time. I can't really guarantee that because I'm not in total charge, but I don't think that anybody has any desire to change the fields. We went through, I mean, it was probably a 10-year process within NCSES to get to agreement on these fields, so we don't want to go through that again anytime soon. Yes.
I was sent with a question from one of our data people who do this, I don't. But he said that what would really help was to have institutional codes uploaded there, because from one year to the next, sometimes typographical things happen, or names of institutions change.
Oh, ID numbers?
Yes.
Yeah, we do have ID numbers. They're just not on the tables on the website.
Maybe that's what the board
Yeah, yeah.
on their website.
So, I will mention that we are rolling out a data system. How many of you are familiar with WebCasper? Anyone? Couple? Wow, okay. So WebCasper is our current tool that we have for custom table building from the HERD data, as well as a lot of the other surveys we do. You can go in and create your own tables with your peer institutions, your selected variables, selected years. It's pretty powerful once you know about it and can use it. We are going forward with a different system that is equally powerful and intuitive and user-friendly. That will be a plug-and-play table builder, but it's not ready yet. Hopefully by this summer it'll be there for HERD data. It will have ID numbers that you can generate your own tables and use the custom ID numbers to compare across years. So.
When does that tool have a name?
It doesn't yet. They're still deciding on that. It's being beta tested right now, so, but not with HERD data yet. So when the HERD data is available for beta testing, if anybody's interested in beta testing, please shoot me an email and I will add you to the list of testers. But for now, you can go to WebCasper, which is WEBCASPAR. If you Google that, you will get to the link for WebCasper, and it is the custom table builder that exists now for HERD data, and it has 2016 data, 1972 to 2016 data in it. So all the variables are in there. All the non-confidential variables are in there. So you can have fun with creating tables and getting rid of that institution funding and benchmarking with just federal funding, for example. Yes?
One of your slides noted that 37% of the respondents put information into a new field. Do you have any sense for, as you add a new field, how long it takes the entire population to begin using it?
Not really, because this is the first time we've added so many, had such a big, we added some subfields in the 90s, and we added non-S&E, and, in the early 2000s. So I think it's probably, I'm going to go with 3 to 5 years for everybody to adopt it. Our earlier process for adding new content was to make items optional for a few years and then, you know, kind of not really report them until we got over a certain threshold of response for those items. Since this was a field change, we couldn't really make that question optional. It was the question for fields. So, you know, it is what it is. It's going to, the fields have always been better in the aggregate than, you know, to look too closely across institutions at specific fields because of the issues of departments not matching up and all of that. So I think the changes, while they were changes, are not really affecting broad trends all that much. Yes.
So, my institution is going through a process where our legislative has mandated the two campuses be brought together. And basically within the law, it states that any research and development members must be combined with listed surveys and such within the state law. So I'm just reaching out to say, I prefer not to have a legislative audit finding every year because my numbers are not combined. Under consideration, as we move forward with thinking of that, or other things that we can do in connection with that to fit, but understanding that the University of Maryland, both campuses will always get an audit finding every year, and it's not something that we're looking forward to the fact that because it's mandated in state law of our reporting numbers.
I've been talking to the University of Maryland leadership about this issue, and so I think that they're working on something that would work. But if we could change our criteria, it'd probably be a lot better for several large public institutions. But like I said, I have no good ideas about how to do that in a consistent way, so I'm open to hearing from the public universities and the private universities that have a stake in the ranking tables. So I don't want to see too many large institutions combined again, like they used to be.
Well, so this information is taken to AAU, right?
It is, yeah.
And so have you seen what the impact of any of this will be to that? Or
No.
talk about that going forward?
No, we have a meeting with AAU in a couple of weeks, so that might come up. But we generally don't have anything to do with how AAU uses the data to figure out their membership. Or Carnegie, we just publish the data, and a lot of these organizations use it for their various purposes. And then we get calls about why am I not in the high research category? And it's because of Carnegie's classification, not ours. I mean, that's how they're using our data. So, and AAU is the same way. We have given advice and counsel to these organizations when these situations have come up, but ultimately it's their call how to use the data. So are there any other areas you want to talk about? The capital expenditures, just to kind of cheerlead for this question a little bit. I know it's daunting to add a new module, but this would be expanding the research enterprise of academic institutions to the nation. You would be able to see how much is going into, you know, the total amount that you're investing in R&D, not just the current funds or the operating expenditures, but the total cost of R&D that research universities are putting forward. So, you know, I think there would be excitement among your leadership to see these numbers go out, but it would be a beast to collect in some cases. Although during our site visits last summer, it didn't seem to be as big a deal as I anticipated for the 4 institutions we talked to, because a lot of the capital expenditures are kind of rare. I mean, they're not land purchases every year. There are not buildings built every year. And this would give the equipment category would be great because you could actually include all the pieces of equipment that are bought for R&D, not just the ones that are on R&D project accounts like now.
I think that the problem is probably going to be with the IP question.
Right.
Because if they're not, those costs are not in our accounting system
Mhm.
in any routinized way.
Right.
So that's gonna require liaising with
Mhm.
other offices to pull that together, and
Mhm.
that's gonna, so there's gonna be a lot of.
Right, yeah, and this is preliminary, this is the first draft of straw man, what could we possibly ask for? It could turn out that the IP drops off because nobody could give us a fair assessment of that. So, you know, what we want is something that could be somewhat consistent across universities, reported consistently, and doesn't cause too much burden. So that we would have to see that there was a real, you know, the cost benefit would be there. We wouldn't do it if every university said, no, this is way too burdensome, and, you know, we wouldn't be comparable. So, you know, when we looked at adding FTE in 2010, we decided against it because that's the feedback we were getting is you're never gonna get what you want out of this, and it's gonna be way too burdensome. So now this is the beginning process of looking at these. We'll have a lot more site visits, workshops, meetings. We'll have our summer webinar again to discuss these kind of issues. So, you know, we won't be making a change next year or anything. So I don't want to alarm anyone that these changes are certain and definitely coming. These are just an entry point to discussing these updates.
And you're talking about building costs necessarily, you're not building depreciation?
That's right. It would be the actual cost of the building.
Because, you know, a lot of us have our financial folks do the HERD survey,
Mm-hmm.
and they're used to thinking of things in terms of depreciation and not necessarily the cost of the building for a specific year.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, we would have to do something with the indirect costs, the depreciation part of the recovered and unrecovered indirect costs if we added this. I didn't want to get into that today because it's a little bit in the weeds, but that would be something that would have to be taken out of the indirect cost part if we add capital. But it would be a calculation. It would not be project by project thing. It would be an overall calculation reduction. But that's a long way off. Yeah.
So I'll just make a comment and then ask you a question. It seems to me that what you're trying to get at with capital expenditures is infrastructure building. And so the question for you would be of value to be able to have a section specifically designed to try to capture infrastructure building and see if we're moving forward or backwards in that.
Yeah, I envision this as a separate module of the survey. So yeah, it could be definitely something along those lines. Yeah. I mean, we have the facility survey, which kind of gets at that, but it only asks for the costs over 250,000, so it doesn't get all of the infrastructure costs. So this will be trying to bridge that so that we get all of it. And probably take some questions off the facility survey if we add these onto the HERD. Yes, back in back.
I'm just curious if you consider the possibility of a public versus private discrepancy when it comes to investment in facilities and equipment. Often, for example, state laws might limit the kind of investment we can make in this activity.
So yeah, we would have it, you know, right now we have tables showing the public versus private on all of them because this is an issue across a lot of our questions already. State and local funding, for example, is a lot higher for public universities than private. So I think we would ask the question the same way. We would just have tables showing the public versus private, you know, having them separate. And iPad's moved to having 2 different surveys. We don't want to go there just yet. Yes.
I don't know the surveys, but where do like the renovation costs go? So like instead of building a new building, you renovate a 50-year-old building from modern technology.
Yeah, I think that would go in here somewhere. I think we would probably need to add some instructions about, I think it would go under buildings.
So I think, because a lot of places we're not buying land.
Right.
And we're not necessarily building new buildings, but we may take a building and repurpose it or modernize
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I would include renovation costs. That's just an omission here, because this is an early draft, but yeah, it would be for renovations too. Anything that you're not including, I mean, that's for R&D, that's not getting captured in what you're reporting on HERD now, because it's under a capital fund, so. We have about 5 more minutes, I guess, unless we have more questions. Did you have a question?
Is this intended to be included in the total R&D expenditures when this would be reported?
So I would anticipate there would be a few tables. One would show a total of capital versus current expenditures. We would have tables showing just the capital, and then tables showing the existing HERD, because we would have a lot of trend data that we would want to carry forward. So we would have HERD as it exists. This would be a separate module that would show the capital, and then would have a estimate of how much depreciation, you know, needed to be taken out of the HERD so that we could add it into HERD for a total. And then, yeah, so there would just be a lot of tables.
Because like you said, with it being happening only a few years, what you would end up seeing is a lot of spikes.
Yes.
And then declines.
Yes.
In the year that a particular institution had a particular land purchase or building purchase.
Right, which is the argument for why it was never in HERD. You know, it wasn't HERD and then it was taken out because, and the facility survey is a biennial. So this could be something that we only ask every few years, and we ask for a 3-year combination. You know, this is, we welcome your feedback on what you think would be most useful in this category. Our main goal is to get it for international comparability, so that when we are looking at U.S. R&D spending, we have the total picture. Any other questions? I have a few next steps. Okay, so I think we're going to hold a workshop later this year to continue discussion of these new content areas. I don't know when later this year, but sometime, hopefully this year. And we're going to go out on some more site visits, do some phone interviews. We're going to talk about these sample questions with more institutions like we did during the last redesign. There will be a webinar this summer that will update everybody on what's going on with HERD, and that's for all of the HERD respondents, but other people are welcome to join with the respondents at their universities. And of course, you're welcome to email me with feedback at any time. And I should say that this is going to be, I'm going to be transitioning off of the HERD survey, actually. Sorry, buried the lead. After 12 years, I'm going to be doing the nonprofit survey, and I'm going to be doing a redesign of our federal agency surveys. And my colleague, Mike Gibbons, who's in charge of the facility survey, is going to be taking over HERD day-to-day responsibilities. I'll still be involved as a consultant and, you know, to lend my expertise after 12 years to him as he gets up to speed on it. But he'll be taking over the day-to-day stuff from here on out. So I think all the respondents will be getting notified later this week about that. So you got the scoop. But it's been a really a privilege to lead HERD for 12 years, and I've learned a ton about it, and I hope that I didn't, you know, cause you all too much burden during that redesign period. And thank you all for everything.